Imagine an Elvis Presley concert in front of more than 18,000 people. A true sea of fans cheering, screaming, and singing along to every note. The atmosphere was festive, just as it always was whenever the King of Rock took the stage. But then, suddenly, something unexpected happened. Elvis stopped the music, signaled his band to fall silent, and for a few seconds, the entire stadium sank into an almost unexplainable silence. Everyone wondered what was happening. And then, with his voice trembling with emotion, he revealed that this moment would not be just about music, but about a tribute. A tribute to a 7-year-old child who had left this world far too soon, but whom he had met and who had deeply touched his heart. The audience was stunned. Thousands of people, who only minutes earlier had been shouting and dancing, now faced an Elvis who was human, sensitive, and vulnerable. What he did next moved everyone to tears, shocking and touching every soul present. A rare, almost mystical moment, which still echoes today as one of the most powerful and unforgettable scenes in the history of the King of Rock.
Elvis was in the middle of Can't Help Falling in Love when someone in the audience shouted something that made him stop the entire show. What happened next left 18,000 people in tears. It was September 15th, 1975, at the Mid-South Coliseum in Memphis, Tennessee. Elvis was performing his second show of the evening, and the energy was electric. He'd already worked the crowd into a frenzy with That's All Right, Hound Dog, and Burning Love. Now he was settling into the slower, more intimate part of his set. The arena was packed with 18,000 screaming fans, but what none of them knew was that in the third row, center section, sat a 7-year-old boy who wasn't supposed to live to see the sunrise. Danny Sullivan was dying. The leukemia that had been fighting for 2 years was finally winning, and his doctors had given him less than 48 hours to live. His parents, Margaret and Tom Sullivan, had made the heartbreaking decision to take him out of the hospital for one final wish. "Mama, I want to see Elvis," Danny had whispered that morning, his small voice barely audible. "Before I go to heaven, I want to hear him sing." Margaret had tried to explain that Elvis tickets were impossible to get, especially on such short notice. But Tom Sullivan, a mechanic who'd never asked for anything from anyone, had spent the entire day calling every contact he had, begging for tickets. At 6 p.m., just 2 hours before the show, a friend of a friend who worked at the Coliseum had found 3 seats. They weren't great seats, third row, but off to the side, but they were inside the building where Elvis would be performing. Danny was so weak that Tom had to carry him from the car to their seats. The little boy was wearing his favorite Elvis t-shirt, a size too big, and a baseball cap to cover the hair he'd lost during chemotherapy. For the first hour of the concert, Danny was in heaven. Despite his pain and exhaustion, he was singing along to every song, his small voice lost in the roar of the crowd, but his joy visible to anyone who looked at him. Margaret kept checking his pulse, worried that the excitement might be too much for his weakened heart. But Danny was more alive than he'd been in months. "This is the best day ever, Mama," he whispered during a brief break between songs. Margaret wiped away tears, knowing this would probably be Danny's last good day. When Elvis began the opening chords of Can't Help Falling in Love, Danny's eyes lit up with pure joy. This was his favorite Elvis song, the one Margaret sang to him every night before bed, the one that seemed to ease his pain when nothing else would. Elvis was about halfway through the song, singing directly to the crowd with that intimate conversational style that made everyone feel like he was singing just for them. Wise men say, only fools rush in. That's when it happened. From somewhere in the third row, a woman's voice cut through the music and the crowd noise. It was Margaret Sullivan, and she was shouting with the desperation of a mother who had nothing left to lose. "Elvis, please, My son is dying. He loves you so much." Elvis stopped singing mid-sentence. He looked confused for a moment, trying to locate where the voice had come from. The band, unsure what was happening, gradually stopped playing. The entire arena began to quiet down as people realized something unusual was happening. Margaret shouted again, now standing and holding Danny in her arms. "Please, he's only got hours left. He just wanted to hear you sing." The arena went dead silent. 18,000 people all turned to look at the woman holding a small, obviously sick child in the third row. Elvis put down his microphone and walked to the edge of the stage, squinting into the audience lights to see what was happening. "Ma'am," Elvis said, his voice now carrying clearly through the arena's sound system. "What did you say?" Margaret, tears streaming down her face, lifted Danny higher so Elvis could see him. "This is my son Danny," she called out, her voice breaking. "He's 7 years old, and he's dying. The doctors say he has maybe hours left. All he wanted was to see you perform. He loves you so much." The arena was so quiet you could hear people breathing. Elvis stood at the edge of the stage, looking down at this tiny boy in an Elvis t-shirt who was clearly very sick. "What's your name, son?" Elvis called out. Danny, despite his weakness, managed to speak loud enough for the microphone to pick up. "Danny Sullivan, I love you, Elvis." Those 5 words, "I love you, Elvis," spoken by a dying 7-year-old, hit Elvis like a physical blow. What Elvis did next had never been done before in the history of rock and roll concerts. He turned to his band and said, "Boys, we're taking a break." Then he addressed the audience. "Ladies and gentlemen, I need you to be patient with me for a few minutes. There's something more important than this show happening right now." Elvis walked off stage, leaving 18,000 people in stunned silence. Backstage, Elvis was moving with a purpose that surprised everyone in his crew. "Joe," he said to Joe Esposito, his road manager, "I need you to get that family backstage. Now." "Elvis, we can't stop the show for Joe." Elvis interrupted, his voice firm but emotional. "That little boy is dying. He came here to see me, and I'm damn sure going to make sure he gets more than just a glimpse from the third row." Within minutes, security was escorting the Sullivan family backstage. Danny was barely conscious, but he was awake enough to realize something incredible was happening. Elvis's dressing room, something beautiful and heartbreaking occurred. Elvis sat down with Danny, who was now lying on the couch, too weak to sit up. "Hey there, Danny," Elvis said softly. "Your mama tells me you like my music." Danny nodded weakly. "I listen to Love Me Tenders every night. It helps me not be scared." Elvis felt his throat tighten. "You know what, buddy? That's my favorite song too. Would you like me to sing it just for you?" Danny's eyes widened. Despite his pain, despite his exhaustion, despite everything, he managed to smile. Elvis sat on the edge of the couch, and in his dressing room, with no microphone, no stage lights, no audience except a dying little boy and his parents, Elvis sang Love Me Tender more beautifully than he'd ever sung it before. When Elvis returned to the stage, 20 minutes later, he wasn't alone. He was carrying Danny Sullivan in his arms. The sight of Elvis walking out on stage, holding a obviously sick little boy, left the entire arena speechless. "Ladies and gentlemen," Elvis said into the microphone, his voice thick with emotion, "I want you to meet my friend Danny Sullivan. Danny is 7 years old, and he's been fighting a battle that no little boy should have to fight. But you know what? Danny is braver than any of us. And tonight, Danny is going to help me finish this show." The arena erupted in applause, but it wasn't the usual screaming and cheering. It was respectful, emotional applause, the kind you hear when people are witnessing something sacred. Elvis sat down at his piano, with Danny on his lap, and began playing "Love Me Tender" again. But this time, something magical happened. Danny, despite his weakness, began singing along. His small, fragile voice blended with Elvis's powerful vocals in a way that was both beautiful and heartbreaking. "Love me tender, love me sweet, never let me go." As they sang together, something incredible happened in that arena. 18,000 people began singing along, but quietly, respectfully, turning the song into a gentle lullaby for a dying little boy. There wasn't a dry eye in the house. Tough guys who came to see rock and roll were crying. Teenagers were sobbing. Parents were holding their own children tighter. When the song ended, Elvis held Danny close and whispered something in his ear that only the boy could hear. Danny smiled, the first real smile his parents had seen in weeks. "Danny," Elvis said into the microphone, "you've made this the most special show of my entire career. Thank you for being here with me tonight." As Elvis prepared to carry Danny back to his parents, the little boy did something that surprised everyone. He took off the baseball cap he'd been wearing to cover his bald head from chemotherapy, and he placed it on Elvis's head. "For you," Danny whispered. "So you remember me." Elvis broke down crying right there on stage, in front of 18,000 people. Elvis finished the concert wearing Danny's baseball cap, and every song he sang seemed to be dedicated to the little boy who was now back in his mother's arms, in the front row. After the show, Elvis spent another hour with the Sullivan family in his dressing room. He signed photographs, gave Danny one of his scarves, and promised to visit him in the hospital the next day. But here's the incredible part of this story, the part that nobody saw coming. Danny Sullivan didn't die that night, or the next day, or the next week. Something about that night, whether it was the excitement, the love he felt from 18,000 strangers, or just the power of having his dream come true, seemed to give Danny a burst of strength that his doctors couldn't explain. Danny lived for another 6 months after that concert. 6 months that the doctors said were impossible. 6 months filled with quality time with his family, more Elvis concerts, and most importantly, 6 months without fear. After that night, Margaret Sullivan said years later, Danny wasn't afraid of dying anymore. He knew he was loved, not just by us, but by Elvis and by all those people who sang with him that night. It gave him peace. When Danny finally passed away in March 1976, he was wearing the Elvis scarf that the King had given him that magical September night. The experience with Danny Sullivan changed Elvis profoundly. From that night forward, Elvis made it a point to connect with sick children at his concerts. Not always as dramatically as he did with Danny, but he started paying attention to the audience in a different way. "Elvis was never the same after meeting Danny," said Charlie Hodge, Elvis's longtime friend and guitarist. He started seeing his concerts not just as entertainment, but as opportunities to touch people's lives. That little boy reminded Elvis why he was really there. Elvis kept Danny's baseball cap for the rest of his life. It was found in his bedroom at Graceland after he died, along with dozens of letters from Danny's family and photos from that incredible night. The concert where Elvis stopped the show for Danny Sullivan became legendary among Elvis fans. Bootleg recordings of that night are some of the most treasured Elvis recordings in existence, not because of the music, but because of the humanity they captured. In 1982, the Danny Sullivan Foundation was established by Margaret and Tom Sullivan to grant final wishes to terminally ill children. The foundation's motto, taken from what Elvis said that night, is "There's something more important than the show." To date, the foundation has granted over 10,000 wishes to sick children, many of them involving meetings with their favorite performers. The story of Elvis and Danny Sullivan reminds us that sometimes the most important moments in life happen when we stop what we're doing and pay attention to what really matters. Elvis could have ignored Margaret's desperate plea. He could have finished his song, completed his show, and gone home. After all, he had 18,000 other fans to consider. Instead, he chose compassion over convention. He chose a moment of human connection over professional obligation. He chose to be Elvis the man instead of Elvis the performer. And in doing so, he gave a dying little boy 6 more months of life, 18,000 people a memory they'd never forget, and all of us a reminder that fame and success mean nothing if we don't use them to help others. Today there's a small plaque backstage at the FedEx Forum in Memphis, which replaced the Mid-South Coliseum, that reads, "In memory of Danny Sullivan and all the children who remind us what really matters." September 15th, 1975. Every performer who plays that venue sees that plaque, and many of them ask about the story behind it. When they hear about Elvis and Danny, something changes in how they approach their own performances. Because the story of that September night reminds us all that we never know who's in our audience. We never know who needs a moment of magic, a touch of hope, or just the knowledge that someone cares. Elvis stopped his show for Danny Sullivan, but really, Danny Sullivan saved Elvis's show by reminding him, and all of us, what performing is really about. It's not about the lights, the screaming, or the applause. It's about the connection between human beings. It's about using whatever gifts we have to make someone else's life a little brighter. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, it's about giving a dying little boy the strength to live 6 more months, by showing him that he is loved by 18,000 strangers and the king of rock and roll. If this incredible story of compassion and human connection moved you, make sure to subscribe and hit that thumbs up button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear about the power of putting people before performance. Have you ever witnessed a moment when someone stopped everything to help another person? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to ring that notification bell for more amazing true stories about the heart behind music's greatest legends.
Imagine an Elvis Presley concert in front of more than 18,000 people, a true sea of fans cheering, screaming, and singing along to every note. The atmosphere was pure celebration, just as it always was whenever the king of rock took the stage. But suddenly, something unexpected happened. Elvis stopped the music, signaled for his band to fall silent, and for a few seconds, the entire stadium was immersed in an almost inexplicable silence. Everyone wondered, what was happening? And then, with his voice breaking with emotion, he revealed that this moment would not be only about music, but about a tribute. A tribute to a child just 7 years old, who had left this world far too soon, but whom he had met, and who had deeply touched his heart. The audience was stunned. Thousands of people, who only minutes earlier were shouting and dancing, now found themselves before an Elvis who was human, sensitive, and vulnerable. What he did next moved the crowd to tears, shocking and touching every soul present. A rare, almost mystical moment, which still echoes today as one of the most intense and unforgettable scenes in the history of the King of Rock. Elvis Presley was not just a singer. He became a symbol, a living legend who transformed music and influenced entire generations. From a simple boy in Mississippi to a worldwide star, his journey was marked by achievements, challenges, and excesses. But just as he shone brightly, his life also ended too soon. On August 16, 1977, Elvis was found lifeless in his Graceland mansion at the age of 42, leaving millions of fans in deep mourning. His unexpected departure turned the myth into eternity, and to this day, his music, his voice, and his presence remain alive. And now, after reliving this moving episode, I want to invite you to be part of our community. Subscribe to the channel, leave a like to support our work, and activate the notification bell so you don't miss any of the next videos we have lovingly prepared for you. After all, stories like this deserve to be remembered, shared, and felt by all of us.